I know some of you might be thinking, what's a white guy doing giving a sermon about Black history? This is a very appropriate question. Unfortunately, white guys have had a very negative role to play in Black history, particularly in this country. Their role hasn't always been bad, though. There are many like me who sincerely want to do the right thing and work towards justice for people of color and seek to evaluate people by the content of their character and not the color of their skin, as Martin Luther King once famously stated. In fact, it was King who began this journey for me. The federal government declared his birthday a national holiday in 1983 when I was 7 years old. Though I initially appreciated a day off from school in January, I grew to appreciate even more his pursuit for justice for people of color as the years went on. His message resonated with me for several reasons, but in ways that led to new insights. First was my religious faith. From the story of creation, to God rescuing Noah and his offspring from the flood, to Moses leading the Hebrews out of the house of slavery, to the fall of Jerusalem and the kingdom of Judah, to their eventual return from exile, and to the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Ours is a faith of liberation from oppression, not in some heavenly afterworld, but in this life and this flawed but beautiful world. I also came from a working class background. My father lost his good paying union job with benefits when I was 9. My family struggled to make ends meet after that. My mom also needed to work to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. My sister and I were latchkey kids for this reason. We needed a key to the house so we can get inside when we came home from school because mom and dad were working and just barely getting by. I was also bullied throughout my childhood. I was also raised to be a Cubs fan, so I had plenty of experiences of being on the losing side. For all of these reasons, King's message of social liberation from oppression resonated with me. All right, on to the new insights, which are not a part of my personal experience and never could be as a white male. As I studied the life of King and the civil rights movement, I heard disturbing stories about how law enforcement hosed down people of color with high-pressure fire hoses and sick dogs on them. I also heard how people of color were not allowed to eat at certain restaurants or go into certain bathrooms or go to certain schools or churches, all of these certain places occupied by white folks alone. I heard the story about 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, which was bombed by white supremacists on September the 15th of 1963. 4 beautiful, precious Black girls were murdered that day. I heard about my mother's story when she was a teenager, of how she and her mom, my grandmother, were on the bus and my mom went over to sit with one of her Black friends. My grandmother forbade it because she was worried other white people would want to beat them up as soon as they got off the bus. My mom sat with her friend anyways and was grounded for the weekend. Fast forward a few years later, and I heard about how another white supremacist shot and murdered 9 Black folks at Mother Emanuel AME while they were having Bible study. Then there was the election of Donald J. Trump. Then there was the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. Then there was the storming of the US Capitol on January the 6th of this year by a group of privileged white supremacists who were mad they didn't get their way in the election and wanted to overturn it with violence. If January the 6th was initiated by Black Lives Matter, the Capitol Police would have no qualms about shooting the rioters immediately. Let me say very clearly here, I have no idea what it's like to be a person of color in this country. Not once have I ever been discriminated against because of the color of my skin. Whenever a police car passes me in traffic or a police officer passes me while I'm walking or riding my bike, I never have to worry about being chased by them or reported by a suspicious white neighbor. Many Black young men cannot say the same thing. What I can say very clearly here is that this deeply troubles me. Us white folks have a lot of reparations to make towards people of color in this country. I would suggest to you that the greatest barrier to this is not the overt racists who stormed the Capitol or shot Black worshipers in their churches. At least you know what you're getting with them. And they expose the racism that is still alive and well today in our era of mass incarceration and implicit racism. They make the implicit explicit, thereby providing a call to action. No, the greatest barrier towards reparations and hence justice for people of color in this country is what King referred to as the white moderate, who, in the words of King in his letter from a Birmingham prison, and I quote, is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. The white moderate of our day is a little different than in King's day. The white moderate of today says, if they are of a more conservative persuasion, that since we elected a Black president, racism no longer exists. They also constantly bring up the 1965 Moynihan report by the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, which blames the lack of personal responsibility on Black fathers for the plight of the Black community. What they fail to mention is why Black fathers are often absent from the family. They fail to mention a system, and I repeat, a system of mass incarceration that targets them and locks them up for years and then releases them back into the community without any support. How do I know that the conservative white moderate says such things? I heard it with my own ears from friends I love and respect. These are not the types who would storm the Capitol or bomb a Black church, but they explain away such events, making them even more of a barrier to the change we need since they don't realize the problem. If you're a white moderate liberal, I have some words for you too. If you preach racial justice in the abstract, but then complain and protest whenever a Black family moves into your neighborhood, or you call the cops when you see a Black man walking in the park while you are walking your dog, you might be a white moderate liberal. Many of you probably have watched America to Me about race relations at Oak Park River Forest High School. Our very own Linda Francis was in that documentary. The white science teacher in that documentary who proclaimed how much he wanted to save his Black students and how he completely understood the plight of his Black students, you guessed it, he's a white moderate liberal. If you refer to people of color as disadvantaged or oppressed instead of as neighbors and friends, you might be a white moderate liberal. I'm guilty of this last point too. Am I a white moderate liberal? So the question is, what is to be done? To be honest, I don't know. But I do know the problem exists, and that's a start. As many of you know, Father John in the vestry chose me for reasons still unknown to me to chair the Social Justice and Mission Ministry. We will be pursuing this question of what is to be done in the coming months. I know the answer to that question is not whatever we think the Black community needs, and then we're going to go over there to save them. That way of thinking needs to die. No, it is a matter of asking our neighbors and friends of color what they need and forming long-term relationships with them. I ask you as a people of God to join me on this quest and follow in the way of the cross as Jesus did. And we shall overcome. Amen.